Okay, so it's helpful at this stage to have another look at the Treaty of Versailles and remind ourselves of some of the main features, views towards the treaty and clauses of the treaty and attitudes towards it. So, the armistice happened in November of 1918. That was an agreement to end the war. The military leadership of Germany, principally Hindenburg and Ludendorff, realized that the war was unwinnable. The Kaiser abdicated and power was handed over to the new civilian government. This was a good move on the part of the German military leadership because it shifted responsibility for the defeat of the First World War towards the civilian government. After all, they were the ones seen to sign the armistice and the treaty later on. So in November of 1918, at the railway carriage in Compiègne, the armistice was signed. The Germans did believe that the armistice would be based upon Wilson's 14 points. Sorry, not the armistice, the treaty. So what were the differing attitudes towards the peace from the three principal leaders of the Allies? Well, Lloyd George did want a moderate peace. However, he did have to satisfy British demands in the British public and politicians for a revenge on the perceived aggressor of Germany. Calls to hang the Kaiser as a war criminal. Of course, the other famous statement made in the House of Commons that Britain would squeeze the German lemon until the pips squeak. So it was felt by many that Germany ought to pay a lot of reparations, a harsh level of reparations. Let's look at the gorgeously moustached Clemenceau on the right there. So Clemenceau wanted revenge and a very high degree of compensation, understandably, as well as Belgium. France had been the country which suffered most of the damage and devastation, certainly to its economy in the war. And again, a very, very high level of soldiers killed and mutilated in the war. He wanted 90% of Germany's coal and iron, and to make sure that Germany would never be able to mount an attack in the future by severely limiting or eliminating its army and possibly even breaking Germany up into smaller states. What did Wilson want? Well, I've done a little halo there. I mean, Wilson was certainly an idealist. He wanted a fair peace. A peace that would be just, equitable, fair. He wanted to be based upon his 14 points. Principally, the first point, there would be no secret treaties. Everything would be, all agreements were made out in the open. There would be international disarmament, that's multilateral. All nations would disarm. He wanted self-determination. Self-determination in Europe. He'd be more realistic as he realised that Britain and France would object to self-determination in their colonies. And he wanted the League of Nations to be set up, an international body which would help to ensure world peace, disarmament, and would sort out disputes again. So there'd be no secret treaties, disputes openly sorted out in the League of Nations. Well, let's have a look at the actual treaty itself. It took 6 months for the treaty to be hammered out. It was a long and complicated process, and there were delegates from all over the world took part in the negotiations, though again they were dominated by the big three. The German delegation reluctantly signed. At first there were talks about refusing to sign it, but ultimately they didn't have a choice because it would have simply meant a continuation of an unwinnable war and possibly worse terms. So the German delegation did sign in June of 1919. Article 231 was the big bone of contention with the Germans, as it placed all of the blame upon Germany and her allies for the war. So none of the blame none of the blame was accepted by Britain, France, or the United States. It rested solely on the Central Powers. The Versailles Treaty aimed to recover costs from Germany, although the actual amount wasn't agreed until later in 1921. The idea of the treaty is it would prevent future war. A lot of land, obviously, was lost by Germany in the treaty. In the west, they lost the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, which had been taken from France in the 1870-1871 Franco-Prussian War. The Saarland was placed under the jurisdiction of the League of Nations until a plebiscite would be held in 15 years' time. Eupen and Malmedy were given to Belgium. In the north, North Schleswig was given to Denmark. Danzig, the port city of Danzig, again was going to be run by the League of Nations as a free port city. And if you look at the grey area underneath there, this is the Polish corridor. Poland has the flag there. You can see the red and white striped flag. The Polish corridor was to give Poland access to the sea, also called the Danzig corridor as well. Upper Silesia was given to Poland at the time, and of course Germany was forbidden to unite with her southern neighbour of Austria. The Anschluss or union with Austria was forbidden. So let's have a look at some German reactions, remind ourselves some German reactions. Diktat, of course, that was how it was felt by the majority of Germans, that it was simply dictated to them. They had no part in the negotiations, but simply had to sign. And something called the Dolchstoss myth. So in 1921, reparations, the amount was finally set at £6.6 billion. It was to be extracted in money, but largely also in goods. So exports such as coal and steel would make. Coal and steel would also comprise part of it, as well as cash. It wasn't actually. It was due to be paid off until in 1987. Although it was actually paid off relatively recently in the 2000s. The colonies of Germany, some colonies in Africa, for example, were to be given as mandates, and also colonies of Turkey were given as mandates principally to Britain and France. Again, it was called a diktat. Let's have a look a little bit more about the Dolchstoss myth. So the Dolchstoss myth is the myth that the German army was capable of winning the war, but had been stabbed in the back. Here you can see a racist cartoon blaming Jewish people for the defeat. Here's another one, another spin on it, blaming communists. You can see here a sinister communist figure stabbing a heroic-looking German soldier in the back. But clearly this is a myth. I mean, it's absolutely evident from the evidence that the German army was shattered and militarily defeated. But because the armistice was signed and the Allies hadn't actually moved into Germany, it wasn't apparent to some Germans the extent of the military defeat, which is why some of them chose to believe the Dolchstoss myth. Here another one, you can see that the new Weimar government is again here, they are also blamed for stabbing the German army in the back. So hopefully that has been fairly useful. So yeah, of course called the November criminals for that reason, that again, the Dolchstoss myth, the stab in the back myth. So let's just to summarise. After this, November 1918, the new civilian government signs it. Differing attitudes to peace between Wilson, Lloyd George, and Clemenceau. The Treaty of Versailles itself. Make sure you're familiar with the terms, the territorial losses, and the German reaction to it. The German reaction on some quarters, especially on the conservative and right-wing, the Dolchstoss myth, blaming a variety of groups associated in their minds, communists, Jews, and the Weimar government, blamed for apparently stabbing the German army in the back. So I hope that was useful, and good luck with the quiz.